writer William Burroughs visited a British museum in the early 70s to see some Mayan books. And he was quite intrigued by the designs of the Mayan gods and their artwork. And he got the idea to do a story. And the story that he wrote has a man named Mr. Hart who wants to live forever. And Mr. Hart, in an expedition in Latin America, discovers the Mayan books. And he's able to decipher them. And what he discovers is that he has found the means to control the world, and which is through fear and death. And the books themselves give him this knowledge, which he then in turn uses, primarily using the media, television, and newspapers, to begin taking over the world. But in the process of deciphering the Mayan books, he unleashes the gods into the world, including the Mayan death god, Ah Pook, the destroyer. And the Mayan gods are not going to bow to him. And they form a band of guerrillas and rebels to destroy him and his machinery of control. Now, Burroughs, in his writings like Naked Lunch, had developed this idea that words themselves were like a virus, meaning they're very powerful, and the word itself would have a meaning in itself, whereby it's almost like they inhabit a host, for example, and they infect that host for good or for ill. And certainly in the hands of a government or any kind of system, they could be used to basically oppress people and control them. And on a personal note, for Burroughs, he knew what it meant to be controlled. I mean, he was controlled by narcotics. He was an addict, and he admitted it, and that didn't much regret it. And so I think he used part of his personal life and his creativity, and which he applied in his storytelling. But in this particular story, what made this unique for Burroughs, and would have been unique for the comic book medium, was that he wanted to do a graphic novel. And he had collaborated earlier with a young British artist who was in his early 20s named Malcolm McNeill on some comic strips in England. And with McNeill, they collaborated for about 6 years to develop a 120-page graphic novel. Now, the phrase graphic novel was not used, but Burroughs was intrigued with the idea of images and words, and not just telling stories, but as a means to just tell something rather unique, which for comic book writers and artists, I mean, that's what they do. But for Burroughs, this was something relatively new. But if this work had been completed, and it was not, it would have been something, I think, rather revolutionary in the comic industry, because it was not going to be an underground comic, which was part of the problem, because it was going to be too expensive, and it was going to be rather lengthy, and so there was no budget for that. So they had to go with a mainstream publisher, and that was itself going to be a problem. Now, even though they found one, didn't work out. Even at one point, they went to Simon & Schuster, which was rather humorous, and of course Schuster said, "We're not touching this." But the main problem also was the artist, which McNeill admits was really him getting the work done. And after a while, it just didn't get done. The text by Burroughs was published in the 70s, with just the text. I think it's just called "Ah Pook is Here," or "Ah Pook the Destroyer," I don't have a copy of the book. It's rather expensive. However, a couple of years ago, Malcolm McNeill, published this. You can see that? The Lost Art of Ah Pook is here. And it only cites him and not Burroughs because this is just the artwork. The text is owned by the estate of the Burroughs, Burroughs estate, and they were not collaborating with this. And so the artwork here is without the text. Now, before I show you that, an excerpt of it, of a completed portion, was published in 1976. And it was published in Rush, the magazine of high entertainment. And this is what they have in mind. You can see there, and I'll explain in just a moment what's going on here. The artwork by McNeill, story by Burroughs. And those of you who have read Burroughs would not be surprised by some of these images. These are about 11, 12 pages, and I think this is one of the few publications any part of this was ever published in. Look at that there. Now, what's just happened here is that the guerrillas who are rebelling against Mr. Hart, they are some of the Mayan gods and some, I guess, people. They have, I guess, special powers. And so when they have intercourse, they create this creature here, as you can see there. Because when they have sex, an egg develops. And from that egg, this creature comes out. And what can he do? Well, what happens here is, let's see if I can show you, sorry. He's there. He transforms. And by speaking some words, he kills this woman, this rich socialite. And her insides just burst. Then, when it conceives, also an egg is formed, and these reddies are created. They're called reddies. As you can see, it's a hermaphrodite, and this is an egg. And from this egg, another reddie appears. And they show up at an American First convention. And from their scent glands, they secrete this biological some kind of biological agent which just consumes and destroys people. And these men you see up here are vigilantes who are in the Bible Belt, killing everyone they see. And they are confronted by the reddies, who consume them. They raise up their arms, and from the scent glands comes this biological agent, which is like creates this severe leprosy, and in the process consumes the world. Again, this is from Rush magazine, December 1976. After the video, I'll cite these works for you all. But this is how it appears here, without the text, as you can see. Again, McNeill was not allowed to use the text. And he had an exhibition, I think in New York, when this book was published, or right before the book was published. And the estate wouldn't let him use the Burroughs words. So it begins there, and it descends. Much of this is unfinished work by McNeill, telling the story. There are essays at the end, one of them by McNeill, discussing the work. It's an interesting picture. McNeill also wrote Observe While Falling, which is his memoir about his career as an artist, and primarily his career and his life writing this book, and his relationship with Burroughs, which is really good. He speaks really well of Burroughs, who was very generous towards him. So it's an interesting book. It would have been fascinating if published, but it didn't. It wasn't meant to be. And yeah, so in a little bit I'll just cite these books for you all. And if you have to get something, you don't really need this so much. This is would probably be enough. And there's no pictures in this book. Well, very few, I'm sorry. There's very few pictures in the book. Although, in the memoir, there is a humorous story when the FBI goes to visit McNeill. And, oh, I'm sorry, there's quite a few at the end. The reason they go visit him is, in the early 70s, Patty Hearst had been kidnapped in New York City, and she was the granddaughter of Randolph Hearst, who was actually an inspiration for Mr. Hart. And they're questioning people in New York at this tenement where McNeill happened to be living. And when the FBI walks in, what do they see? They see this artwork up in the walls, and they don't know what to make of it. Thank you.